Well, here we are again, and today we are in my kitchen in order to talk about and unpack the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or Hag Chomatzot. I'm Rebekah from Teshuva Ministries, and welcome. I am super excited to talk about this feast. This is an amazing feast, and it has so many wonderful prophetic shadow pictures in it and things that we need to take to heart, because this feast is actually not completely fulfilled without us doing something. Yes, I know. Don't turn me off yet, because you'll understand as we get through this teaching and unpacking unleavened bread, you actually have to participate in this feast in order for it to be fulfilled. All right, so let's get going here. We're going to find out when unleavened bread is. All right, so just remember, we're looking at the spring feast right now. So we have Rosh Hashanah at the beginning of the year that helps us know when to find Passover. So from Rosh Hashanah, which means head of the year, we count 14 days to get to Passover or Pesach. And then the day after Pesach is unleavened bread. I guess I want to back up for a second. You actually, before Passover, as believers in Yeshua, you have the Last Supper that happened the night before Passover, which I think is super important and cool. And I think somewhere around here I'll have a little link so you can go watch that teaching video there. But this is the basics video on unleavened bread. So let's continue forward here into unleavened bread. So just remember how you find this feast. Just wanted to make sure you remember. This is Michael Rood's calendar. And so as you see here, you have Passover on Wednesday this year, and actually this year this is 2020 or 6020 from creation. This week of feasts actually follow the same pattern as the rhythm of the feast back when Yeshua was here during his Passion Week. What is called his Passion Week. So we have Passover, which was last Wednesday, and then the day after, or that evening of Passover at twilight when sunset came, it started the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, unleavened bread goes for 7 days, right here, and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So actually tomorrow, because this is a Tuesday, tomorrow is the very last day of unleavened bread. Now remember, you also have a couple things in between this. During the week of unleavened bread, you have the resurrection on the Shabbat during unleavened bread. You also have the Feast of First Fruits that happens the day after the weekly Shabbat during unleavened bread, and that's always on a Sunday. And here I'll have some tags or cards for you to click on, and you can go watch the teaching I have on first fruits, as well as what I might as well just throw up my Passover one too, so you can see all those right here, the spring feast basics videos. One thing I want to point out is the first day of unleavened bread and the last day of unleavened bread are high Shabbats. And by that, the scripture means it's super important. It is super important that you show up to these. It's an extra special Shabbat. And in the commands, you can find the commands. Oh, I had them written down here. Oh, we're going to actually read them. In the commands, you see that he says to have a holy convocation. So you have a gathering with other people on the first day and the last day, and you do no regular work. But he says that you can actually make food that day. So yay, when we make food, this place gets super dirty. And then I can't find my dishes. So back when I was at the teepee, I really liked it because I could take all my dishes outside and just leave them there, and then the kitchen would still be clean throughout the feast. But then the raccoons would get into the dishes, and pretty soon they would be hauled off, and I would find spatulas and stuff down in the woods. But I want to show you also my calendar. This is my calendar in case you're interested. If you go to teshuvaministries.com and then you click on shop and pull down to Rebekah Co., you will find lots of different products in there, but one is the Biblical Feast Calendar. This is actually an interactive calendar where it has a lot of teachings in here about how to find Rosh Hashanah and the correct biblical reckoning. So there's lots of stuff to read in here. But then when you get to the actual months, this is left somewhat blank. I don't know if you can see that, but you get to fill this in according to the year that you're celebrating. And down here in the corner, it tells you how to find the feasts that are in that month. I think I have let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so I have actually a calendar key in here to help you actually fill in this calendar. So this is a wonderful calendar. This is very beautiful, and it's something that you can give away as a gift, hang on your wall, that sort of thing. So today I have on the table here, I have assembled some things that we like to eat with unleavened bread. And there is so much more that we like to eat with unleavened bread throughout the course of the week. From High Shabbat to High Shabbat, we like to explore different ways to eat unleavened bread. We have savory stuff with it, we have sweet stuff with it, we have it plain, but we've been noshing on it all the time this week. This morning we had Old World rice with matzah and tzatziki sauce. Old World rice is like salmon and rice or barley with cabbage and onions and garlic and salt and pepper and a ton of butter, and it's super good, especially when you add the tzatziki sauce. But here we have, I have two different kinds of hummus. Regular hummus, and this one is a pesto hummus that we like to dip our matzah in. This is actually a little bit of my falafel that I'm going to scrunch up into balls and deep fry later to eat with our matzah. And this smells absolutely amazing. This has, actually it has green onions, it has garlic, it has cilantro and parsley and a ton of spices. It actually also has some mint in it. Super good. We also have kosher salt that when you roll out your dough, you can sprinkle kosher salt on it and get an extra salty bread. Right here I have some shug, some homemade shug. All of this is homemade, but some homemade shug. This is super spicy. It has a lot of hot peppers in it and stuff, jalapenos, but you can put it on top of avocados on top. So if you slice avocados, put it on top of your matzah with a little bit of that drizzle on top. Oh, heavenly. Absolutely heavenly. Another thing we like to do is eat a ton of eggs with our matzah. So scrambled eggs, just all kinds of different eggs with our matzah. I really like butter and honey with my matzah. We actually have some of that during the Passover Seder. And then also, of course, olive oil. Just dip it in olive oil. Oh man, we eat it with, sometimes I will put it in the oven and it will kind of like get risen in the center. We cut it and we put strawberries and yogurt in there. And sometimes we make it super sweet and we pan fry it in a little oil with the cinnamon and sugar, kind of like an elephant ear. We'll make a thinner version of this and do crepes. So then you can put like peanut butter and applesauce in your crepe, or peaches, or anything, any kind of fruit you have. There's just so many things. We did gyros actually this last week with our matzah. And my matzah is nice and flexible. This is really good matzah. You can get my cookbook on Amazon called The Mastery of Matzah. That will help you know how to make this kind of matzah where it's flexible. You can also leave it in the oven for a little longer and it'll get crispy like crackers. There's so many wonderful ways to eat matzah, but today we're going to look at why we eat matzah. We're going to look at the command of this festival, and we're going to unpack it just a little bit for you, because I think you're going to find this feast completely and utterly amazing. This is a crucial feast. So if you don't actually participate in this feast, if you don't take to heart the point of this feast, I'm sorry to say, but you ain't getting into the happily ever after. Okay, there is no life for you unless you eat the bread of life. Okay, so this is a super important feast to show up for, as well as to participate in and to take to heart, to live it out all year long. So let's just look back at the Hebrews and when they came out of Egypt under Moses's watch care there. Remember Passover, the day of Passover, they sacrificed a lamb, then they put the blood of the lamb over their doorposts. The destroyer went past them, right? And then they left Egypt that night. And at that night is actually the first high Shabbat of unleavened bread. So they were actually traveling, running away, fleeing their captors on Shabbat. And I find that stunning because the Feast of Unleavened Bread is all about freedom, really. Day of First Fruits is all about hope, you know, and I love this feast because it's all about freedom. So something that I believe is that they were set free from their captors, not only on the first day of unleavened bread, but also on the last day of unleavened bread. You see, the first day of unleavened bread, they were running out of Egypt. So the slave masters, the Pharaoh, had let them go. So now they were free, and they were running out and moving as fast as they could out of Egypt to get all as far as the way they could from him and to follow that Moses out. And then on the last high Shabbat of unleavened bread, I believe they were standing there at the Gulf of Aqaba, and that's when the water parted, and they went through, and Yehovah teased the Egyptian army into the sea, and it covered over them and destroyed their enemies for good. And that is huge. That must have been a huge relief. I mean, they would never be sought after again. They would never be in that kind of slavery again to Pharaoh. Unfortunately, they didn't listen. Unfortunately, they didn't obey. And so later they were taken into captivity again. Oh, I just want to tear my hair out. Sometimes I look at that story and all the things that Yehovah promised them if they would just obey. I mean, I think if they had just obeyed, they could have had it so good for so long. I mean, it could have been a very wonderful life for a long time to have the Elohim of the universe, you know, Yehovah Elohim, doting on this group of chosen people. I mean, he would have gone all out to take care of them. They totally missed out. But in this one little picture here of the original Passover out, I just wanted you to see that this Feast of Unleavened Bread is really all about freedom. You have bookends of freedom to this feast. And I think as we delve deeper into understanding what this feast is about, we'll see that it is all about freedom, okay? And I'm going to give it a little hint here. It is the utter relief of holiness. That is freedom. And I'll show you how in a little bit. All right, let's read the instructions for unleavened bread, actually, before we continue on. See, I'm just going to give you a whole bunch of texts, and you can write them down, and then I'm just going to kind of skim. You can read them more later. Exodus 12:15-20, Exodus 12:39, Exodus 13:6-10, Exodus 23:14-17, Leviticus 23:6-8, Numbers 23:16-25, Deuteronomy 16:1-4, Deuteronomy 16:7-8. And again, I am reading from my Spring Feast handbook. That will be a wonderful addition to your library. It'll help you through understanding the Last Supper, Passover, Pesach, Unleavened Bread, and then First Fruits, the Resurrection, First Fruits, the Ascension. Shavuot is also Spring Feast, but that has its own handbook because it's so big, so intense. All right, we're going to find 8 things that I see that Yehovah asked us to do for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, if you read all of these things, I'm going to just summarize here. Throughout his commands, it looks to me like there's 8 things to do. Number 1, you're supposed to eat unleavened bread, obviously for 8 days. You're supposed to keep the first day of the feast as a high Shabbat. and you're not supposed to do any customary work. But you are on that day of the feast, the first day of unleavened bread, you're supposed to get all the leaven out of your houses. You see the actual command to get rid of the leaven on the first high day of unleavened bread. So pretty well. Number 3, it also says on there that you can make food, okay? So you can make food on that high day. Number 3, the third thing that I see is the last day of the feast is also a high Shabbat, so we are also to rest and do no customary work. But we are supposed to have on number 4, on the last high Shabbat, we are to have a feast. On the first high Shabbat and the last high, it says that we are supposed to have a holy convocation or a gathering, get together and participate in this feast together. All right, so the 5th thing that I see here that we are supposed to do for unleavened bread is that we are to remember that we were in affliction, that we were in slavery, but He brought us out. Okay, He brought us out of Egypt, but He also is going to bring us out of sin. All right. So, and then number 6, we're supposed to tell our children about what happened during Passover so many years ago. We're supposed to tell our children about this feast and everything that happened to our ancestors and what Yehovah did. We're supposed to remember it to our children and the next generation so that it continues to be passed down and so that we remember. I mean, how many of you forget? Forget. You come up to a feast and you go, what is this about? I do that all the time. But how many of you forget? I'm talking about a bigger forgetting here. How many of you forget that Papa Yehovah means you well? That Papa Yah loves you? That Papa Yah has a plan? That Papa Yah, wants to rescue you and deliver you? We forget His heart, we forget His character, we forget. So he says all the time, remember. Oh, okay. All right, and then the seventh thing that I see with this feast is that you're supposed to come to His feast with your hands full. All right, he says you're never supposed to show up to His feast with empty hands. You're always supposed to have something to bring, all right, something to give Him according to how you have been blessed. And then number 8, the thing that I see there is that all men are supposed to show up to Yerushalayim, which they're supposed to bring their families, come to Jerusalem for this feast. You're supposed to appear to Yehovah our Elohim in the place that He chooses, which is Yerushalayim. So that's what I see in the Torah commands. Now, again, on that showing up in Yerushalayim, something that I always tell Papa, I'm like, I would love to show up to Yerushalayim, but you have not increased my wealth so I can do that. You have not restored to me the fortunes of my forefathers. I don't have the money, I don't have the capability to go back and forth between here and Jerusalem, and I don't have the ability to buy land over there or to get an apartment over there. I don't have the ability to live over there. The government is set against that because I'm a believer in Yeshua. So, it's up to Papa to make that happen, right? And I love the Feast of First Fruits where it says, just the idea that I'm a plant and He's the planter, and He's going to plant me in the land. A plant doesn't plant itself. Just like a Hebrew slave can't deliver themselves, right? We're slaves. We're slaves to all kinds of things. We talked about that yesterday during my First Fruits basics. But we're slaves to money, because we have to have it in order to live, right? We're slaves to the job so that we can make the money, so that we can have the house and live. Otherwise, it is super hard to live without those two things. And that you going to work and coming home, and then going to work and coming home and spending most of your energy, most of your good time, most of your life is spent building somebody else's kingdom. What else is that besides slavery? But the problem is that you have to have a job you have to be making some money somehow. You're either going to earn it or you're going to make it, but it doesn't, you got to get some, right, in order to live here. So there's this sacrificing that you do of time and energy in order to get that so that you can provide a home for your children and for your wife and for your husband and for your dogs and animals and family, and so you don't perish out there in the cold. But that's slavery, because we weren't created for that. We were created to live in a garden. Our hearts remember paradise, and we struggle with the way the world is. The more and more you get awake, the more and more you struggle with the way the world is, because the more awake you get, the more in touch you will get with your heart, and the more you realize you are a slave. The more you realize you are not where you were meant to be. And it gets very clear to an awake person how enslaved you are. For those that aren't awake, it's like a zombie thing. They just like, it doesn't matter. They're happy with their, weekends. They're happy with their 1 week vacation a year. They're happy with, the dribbling in of a little bit of money so they can just make the payments, and live month to month. I'm sorry, I'm not okay with that. I'm just not okay with that. I want what's coming. I want paradise restored, because my heart's burning with longing for that. So in that knowing, and then in that burning of longing for what's coming, I know that I'm a slave on some level. Yes, I have Isaac, who is, doing the outside of the house work so I can do ministry, but we're a HUD, and I feel his pain and I feel his suffering, and, and I know that our marriage isn't as great as it could be if we were both here together and doing life together, like we did at the teepee. Actually, we did that. We did life at the teepee for years. It was us building a homestead together. He didn't work outside the house. Basically, we were homesteading. And that was beautiful. It really, our marriage was really a lot better there than it had been, when we had a little house downtown. But my point is that we are in bondage, and we need a deliverer to show up and deliver us. We need the planter, the farmer, to take us and plant us in the land. And until he does that, what can the plant do? What can the slave do? Nothing. So you can beg, you can pray, you can cry out. When Yahweh said, I've heard the cries and the prayers and the misery of my people, and then he begins to act. I suppose if his people are okay, just totally okay with what you got, and there's nothing burning in your heart for more, maybe we need to get louder, people. Maybe we need to cry louder out to him and really recognize the bondage that we are in and say, it's wrong and I don't want this anymore and I want freedom. Come free us, Yehovah Elohim. And here's the thing with Chag Chomatzah, with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I love this feast because he actually has given us a way to have as much freedom as we can right here, but this is actually going to get us into the place where we get all the freedom that he wants to give us. Yeah. So we have to do this feast. We have to eat unleavened bread in order to get to the happily ever after, where all the freedom that our heart knows it was created for. Oh yes, we're going to get it all there, but we have to go through the Feast of Unleavened Bread to get there. So I just wanted to mention I am wearing a new t-shirt that is available through Teshuvah Ministries. If you go to our website, www.teshuvahministries.com, and you go on shop, you'll see Teshuvah. And I have a line of t-shirts, many lines of different t-shirts with different campaigns on it. This one I think is completely appropriate for this feast, not only for this time in world history as to what we're dealing with and going through right now with the COVID thing and all that junk, but here is a nice t-shirt for this feast. So it says, this would be a good time to binge Yeshua. And then it says to indulge in an activity, especially eating to excess. John 6:49-51. So go get your t-shirt today and wear that. I have sweatshirts and all different kinds, tank tops and all different kinds of things, even canvas bags and mugs and things. So go check that out and let's binge on Yeshua. All right, let's binge on Yeshua right now. All right, so in all these scriptures that I gave you that have the commands of how to celebrate unleavened bread, we see a striking thing in there that I want you to grasp. Something that I believe the Jews miss, and I also believe Messianics miss. But as a Melchizedek priest, as somebody who believes in the change that made Yeshua the high priest and king in the order of Melchizedek, and thus there's actually change in law and all that jazz, I'm really looking for how Yeshua fulfills the feast. I'm really over obsessed, I guess, with looking at how his work coincides with the feast, and so I don't really want to, kind of skip over anything. And this is a little gem that Papa gave me, or the Rock gave me, many years ago. But let's look at these. So I have here that I read you all the commands, and I've gone through them very detailed and found all the times that Yehovah says to eat unleavened bread, and all the times that he says to not eat unleavened bread. Now, he says in there quite a bit throughout the course of the story, you're not to have any leaven in your homes, that sort of thing. But when he gives an actual command, I'm looking at that right here. So when you see this, it says in Exodus 12:15-20, you shall eat unleavened bread. And then later, you shall eat unleavened bread. And later, you shall eat unleavened bread. And then in Exodus 13:6-10, it says, you shall eat unleavened bread. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days. Then you look at Exodus 23, and it says, you shall eat unleavened bread 7 days. Leviticus 23:6-8 says, 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. And then Numbers 23, it says, unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days. Then Deuteronomy 16:1-4 says, 7 days you shall eat leavened bread with it. And then Deuteronomy 16:7-8 says, 6 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the 7th day have a sacred assembly. All right, so I've counted those 10 times that Yehovah says, eat unleavened bread. 10 times is what I see. Maybe you see more. I see 10 times. Let's look and see how many times he says to not eat leavened bread. So, let's see. Oh, Exodus 12:15-20. In there it says, you shall eat nothing leavened. There's one time. Okay, Deuteronomy 16:1-4 says, you shall eat no leavened bread with it. Twice. All right, 2 times he says, do not eat leavened bread. 10 times he says you must eat unleavened bread. All right, people. So if you intend to fast from bread during unleavened bread, you've missed the whole entire feast. Okay? Because he said you must eat unleavened bread. More than he said you must not eat leavened. You got to do both. Don't have any leaven in your house, of course, and don't eat leavened bread. But you must eat leavened bread. As in, you can't go a day without eating it. You can't say, I'm gluten intolerant, so I can't eat it. If you're gluten intolerant, find a recipe that you can make that is bread, a bread type recipe. I really think this whole gluten intolerant thing, and trust me, I have a daughter that has issues with gluten. So I'm not making fun of people that struggle with this by any means, but so it's not your fault necessarily, but I really feel that part of the attack on wheat and our grains to make us intolerant to it is so that we will not be able to do this feast. This feast is required. It's required that you eat unleavened bread, and you have to use some sort of flour for that. You can't use xanthan gum and and tapioca and arrowroot powder. I mean, I don't know what kind of bread it's awful. So this feast follows the first fruits barley harvest. Okay, this is happening during the barley harvest, because the barley, remember, was Aviv at Rosh Hashanah, which means that, a couple weeks later at the Feast of First Fruits, it's going to be ready to harvest. It's going to be ready for that first wave offering. So they're going to take the first barley out of the fields, they're going to wave it before Papa, and then now it's okay to start eating of that. So it's very clear that probably this bread was made from barley early on, because wheat harvest didn't come till later. So, but just the idea that, barley flour has gluten in it. So, but just the concept that, Hasadan has made it so that our bodies are reacting to the wheat, to the barley, to the gluten that's in. Of course, if you have white flour, it's been processed, it's going to have less of the nutrients in there to help break it down. So you're going to have issues with a ton of gluten sitting in your gut. Not a good thing, of course, but the ancient grains, the original ones, our bodies really shouldn't be having problems with. So there's ways around that. You can soak your flours in kefir or apple cider vinegar, that sort of thing. You can make it with an ancient flour like Eichhorn or Sonora flour, stuff like that. But my point here is not to make you feel bad if you have a gluten intolerance, but just to say somehow you got to figure out how to eat of unleavened bread all week long. And I really feel there's been this huge, attack on that, because this feast is so important. But I want to go over right now what leaven is, okay? Because he does say that we're supposed to get the leaven out of our house. And leaven in the scriptures represents sin. Not always, actually. Most of the time, though, it represents sin. So, and also you have to remember a little like yeast, okay? So leaven is yeast. It's going to, you put a little bit of yeast in your dough, and the dough, all of the dough is affected by that little bit of yeast, because it, raises the whole entire batch. And it's interesting that, Shaul talks about, which I think we'll talk about later, but you have a little bit of leaven, a little bit of sin in your life, and it's going to just kind of continue to leaven the rest of you. It's going to affect the rest of you. Have a little bit of, have someone who's, participating in some sin in your congregation, in your assembly, and it's going to kind of leaven the whole bunch. So this is important to know what Papa thinks is leaven. Let's look at it. So, okay, during this feast, leaven represents sin. Man-made religion has its own list of what sin is, but what does Yahweh say sin is? Wouldn't it be good to know what our Creator says sin is so that we can obey and not be leavened? This is really interesting. Like, if you think about it, like when I grew up, Seventh-day Adventists, they have pretty much their own list of what sin is. When I grew up, it was, wearing makeup is a sin. Drinking coffee is a sin. Caffeine was a sin. Going to a theater was a sin. Dancing was a sin. They did have keeping the seventh day, right? But what about all the other commands of keeping Shabbat? What about, and then celebrating Christmas and Easter? Those are sins, celebrating to other gods, that's sin. So I don't think that when I grew up, I ever really was proactive in looking at what the scriptures actually say sin was and is, until I became a Hebrew, and then I was like, whoa, I really want to know what Papa says sin is. So in 1 John 3, 4, and 8, we see that sin is breaking the eternal royal law of love. So let's see, it's 1 John. All right, so 1 John 3, 4 says, everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness. And then in verse 8 it says, he who does what is sinful is of the devil, because the devil has been sinning from the beginning. Whoa. The reason the Son of Yehovah appeared was to destroy the devil's work. No one who is born of Yehovah will continue to sin, because Yehovah's seed remains in him. Oh, wow. He cannot go on sinning because he has been born of Yehovah. This is how we know who the children of Yehovah are and who the children of the devil are. Anyone who does not do what is right is not a child of Yehovah, nor is anyone who does not love his brother. Wow. That's pretty strong in there, isn't it? So we can see here clearly that sin is lawlessness. Sin is breaking the law. So people who say they aren't under the law, they don't, what their issue is, they know something changed, and they know something was nailed to the cross, but they don't understand what law is nailed to the cross and what law remains. Okay, so that's a huge study. I want you to go see Shavuot Basics Teaching number 2, and you'll find out basically that is the royal law of love that's in the Ark of the Covenant that never went away. It's always everlasting. It's always going to be. Exodus 19-24. You will find that law, that royal law of love, right there. And there's more. I can spend all day on that right now, but I've got to keep going on Unleavened Bread. But isn't that interesting that if you don't obey and stop sinning, then you are a son or daughter of the devil. And yet if you obey and you stop sinning, then you are a son or daughter of Yehovah. It's kind of that, it's that fruit thing that we were talking about yesterday in First Fruits. At First Fruits, it's like, by the fruit you will know, right? So if you're producing good fruit, righteous fruit, right doings according to Yehovah, then you are his child. If you're not producing good fruit, then he's going to hack that tree down at some point, right? Okay, so I have quite a big list here for you to look at according to what the scripture says that leaven is, or sin. Remember, this feast is about getting leaven out and eating of the unleavened one, 10 times that way and 2 times that way, right? So we got to look at what leaven is. For now, let's just look at what sin is according to the scriptures. So I have quite a list here of what the scripture says sin is. So get your piece of paper and a pen out, and I'll have it scrolling right here for you, I hope. But in Matthew 22:36-40, and in Mark 12:28-33, Yeshua says, which is our rabbi, so pay attention, ding, 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 pay attention, it's our rabbi speaking. He says that sin is not loving Yehovah with all your heart. So if you don't love Yehovah with all your heart and all your everything, then you're sinning. That's what our rabbi just said. When it says love Yehovah your Elohim with all your heart and all your soul and all your everything, like, if you're not completely drained serving him, then you haven't given him your everything. Consider that for a while. Yeah. All right, let's keep going. In Matthew 19:17, it talks about that sin or death is opposite keeping Yah's commandments, which equals life. Okay, and then in 1 John 3:4-8, we just read, Yehovah says that sin is breaking the eternal royal law, found in Exodus 19-24 in that area. And he said sin is worshiping other gods other than him. We see that in the covenant itself. Sin is not showing up for Passover. Did you know that? Numbers 9:13, it literally states it in there. It's a sin to not show up for Passover. If you have promised Yehovah, if you've come into covenant with him, if you have crossed over and you are now a Hebrew who is walking out your faith in a different way than the pagans and the Christians, then if you don't show up for Passover, it is a sin. That's leaven, okay? All right, so here's some more verses. I'm going to scroll up here. 1 Samuel 12:23, Leviticus 4:2, Leviticus 26:14-15, Deuteronomy 30:15-20, Matthew 5:17-20, Matthew 7:21-23, Matthew 19:17, Mark 7:8-9, Romans 3:20, Romans 6:23, 1 Corinthians 5:1-13, 1 John 3:4-8, 1 John 5:17, Revelation 22:14. Those talk about leaven and defining what sin is. We can look at the law and just look at what sin is, because we know breaking it is going to be sin. So then you want to stay in line with the law and be more concerned about Papa's law than man's law, okay? So if you are super concerned right now about man's law, and you think that grace will cover you if you don't take seriously his law, Yehovah's law, you have a problem, people. All right. you have a really huge problem. If you fear man more than you fear Yehovah, let me switch hands with that. If you fear man more than you fear Yehovah, and so you obey man, and you say, well, if I can, I will obey you. If I have time, I will obey you. Then you are full of leaven. And I am not joking. That's what the scripture says, and I'm just repeating what the scripture says. So I'm going to say to you that the Feast of Unleavened Bread is all about really looking hard at this. I'm not trying to lay a guilt trip on you. I'm trying to tell you the truth. All right? Yeah. Do you catch me? Do you understand? This is important. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is about two different kinds of bread that you're going to be eating of. One is leavened with sin. The other is unleavened, all right, without sin. And whichever one you eat of, and we're talking symbolically, people, okay? So if you eat of leaven, sin, you are going to become leavened. You are going to become sinful. And most likely you're going to affect everyone around you, because a little leavens the whole lot kind of idea. But if you want to be righteous, if you want to get to the happily ever after, if you eat of unleavened bread, the unleavened one who is perfect, who has no sin, if you eat of that, then you're going to not have sin in you. All right? And you are going to be made perfect like the unleavened one. All right, so one thing that I have people ask me all the time is, what do you do with your cornstarch and your baking powder? Is that also yeast? And I want to say that, of course, yes, yes, it is, because it actually leavens or puffs up the bread and it makes it like light and fluffy. Baking powder and baking soda. Did I say cornstarch before? I meant baking soda. Those are leavening agents. So yeah, you want to get rid of those in your house to participate in this feast. So you get rid of your yeast and these two things. But I just want you to know what I do, and I take it out of my house and I put it out into the garage. It's because I get bulk, so I have like huge amounts of it, and I think we miss the heart of the feast if we get super obsessed with the little things that can get us off track of what this feast is actually about. Because remember, he says 10 times to eat unleavened bread and 2 times to get the leaven out. So it's important to get the leaven out, yes. And this is part of the symbolic practice of getting leaven out. We're really talking about sin in our lives. So I just have this one thought for you. If you're super obsessed with getting baking powder and baking soda and a yeast agent for making bread out of your house, but you don't give thought to, and you're not super careful about the leaven that's in your heart or in your house, then you miss the whole entire point of the feast. Okay, so be really careful when you get super narrow-minded and really focused on, I gotta get the leaven out of the house, and you throw this away, or you give it to your neighbor, you burn it in the backyard, or that something like that. You know, he didn't say to burn it in your backyard, and he didn't say to give it away. He said to get the leaven out, and it's symbolic of getting the leaven out of your own life. So your priorities will be really screwed up and upside down if you don't really look at the heart of this feast and what he's trying to get after, okay? All right, as we're talking about leaven and kind of unpacking that, one of the things that you'll notice is that Chag Chomatzo really has, in my opinion, the heart of it has really been hijacked with the whole Rebekah Hamatz practice. So I mean, when you look at the way the Jews celebrate this feast and the way many Messianics celebrate this feast, they completely skip over the you must eat unleavened bread to the get rid of the leaven, and they really focus on that with this practice called Bedikat Hamatz, or it's called the search for leaven. So the father will, the mother will leave some little traces of bread around on the floor or wherever, and then the father will lead the kids through the house with a feather and a candle and a little wooden spoon, and you're trying to get all the little crumbs everywhere, and then you put it in a bag and you go outside and you burn it, representing getting rid of the leaven. Now, Messianics kind of back engineer this, and they look at getting the leaven, the sin out of your house with the Ruach HaKodesh, and putting it on the cross idea, and then burn, and yes, you can totally see that. But I have some wisdom for you. So if you practice that, you can really look at what the scripture says about who actually gets rid of the sin. I think that's where it just doesn't sit well in my heart. Not to say we shouldn't look at what sin is and then look at our life and say, do I have sin in my life? The prayer at that point, if you have sin in your life, is to say, Yehovah Elohim, please get rid of the sin in my life. And that doesn't mean that you go on and keep sinning. It just means that you become clear about who it is that actually gets rid of your sin. If it's you, then there's a place there for you to kind of be your own Elohim, I think. And let's look at the scriptures on this. So I'm not full of air right here. let me have you read some of these with me. Psalms 103 verse 12 says, as far as the east is from the west, so far he removed our transgressions from us. 2 Samuel 12:13 says, then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against Yehovah. Yehovah has taken away your sin, Nathan replied. Hebrews 9:26 says, otherwise he would have had to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world, but now he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to do away with the sin by the sacrifice of himself. So he does away with the sin himself. Isaiah 38:17 says, surely for my welfare I had such great anguish, but your love has delivered me from the pit of oblivion, for you have cast all my sins behind your back. Isaiah 43:25 says, yes, I am he who blots out your transgressions for my sake and remembers your sin no more. Zechariah 3:9 says, I will remove the iniquity of this land in a single day. Micah 7:9 says, you will cast out all our sins into the depths of the sea. So it's not us that does it, it's him. Jeremiah 33:8 says, and I will cleanse them from all iniquity that they have committed against me, and forgive all the wrongs that they have committed by rebelling against me. And then Zechariah 3:4 says, I have removed your iniquity. Oh, this is a cool verse. So the angel of Yehovah said to those standing before him, take off his filthy clothes. Then he said to Joshua, see, I have removed your iniquity, and I will clothe you with splendid robes. So we can see that Yehovah wants the credit for removing our sin that we are basically powerless to do anything about. So I feel like, we want to make sure and give credit to where credit is due, and it's due to Yehovah Elohim. He does this work inside of us. We don't do that. So combination of, us repenting and acknowledging our sin, looking at the scriptures and go, what is sin? Finding out what it is, then acknowledging our sin, and then laying it at Yehovah's feet and saying, help me get rid of this. You get rid of this. And then acknowledging who actually gets rid of it is him. That doesn't mean that you don't have, won't be moved into growing up and making new habits and things that, getting rid of sin in different ways. But I can look back on my life and I can see sin in my past. And throughout the course of me, simply focusing on him and doing his things, those sins have fallen off. It's not something that I grinned and bared and said, I'm going to get rid of this and I'm going to stop. In fact, every single time I did that, I was messed up. I would go, just for an example, I was anorexic bulimia. I had problems with that in my 20s. So I had a calendar on my wall, And every day that I didn't binge, I would put a check mark and I go, yes, I overcame. And I would go the next day, yes, I overcame. And I would do it again, and I'd do it again, and I'd do it again. And I'd get to like day 13, 12 or 13, and then I'd have a horrible day, and I would go get a huge amount of chocolate, and I would just binge on chocolate and be so sick. And then I would see that blank day. You know, I didn't get the check mark on that day. And I would just, that would throw me into depression, you know, and I would have this voice that said, you're so pathetic, so you can't get by, you can't get past this. This is, you know, going to eat you alive, and you're going to get fat, and, you know, no one's going to want to marry you. And I mean, just, you know, just voice after voice and thought after thought. And I could never get control of it, ever, until I lost the calendar. Until I stopped trying, and instead I obeyed Yehovah and started to listen to him. And he led me through the course of a journey where I actually lost the ability to buy food. Like, I didn't even have the money. I was living in my car. I remember in the ashtray being able to find, you know, just a few quarters to go into the store to buy macaroni and cheese, a couple boxes, and I would make it to last the entire week. And yet I was so excited to be in love with Yehovah. He had changed my heart. And I never thought during that time, I want to binge. It was like it left me. It was completely gone, and it was gone because I fell in love with him. I focused on him and his ways and the king, and I was looking for where their fingerprints were in my life. And so I really believe I've been through a lot. I've been through stuff like that. I've been through a ton of abuse. I have a Mary Magdalene experience in a 10-year run of my life. I am well versed in what it looks like to be leavened. All right. And I you know, I wasn't a great daughter. I didn't respect my parents. There's all kinds of things that I have done in my past that I'm so not proud of, but that I'm relying on Yehovah's grace to you know, get rid of that. And he's freed me from the leaven that I had in my life, but it was him that did it, not me. So every time I tried to get rid of it, you know, I couldn't. Too big, too much. Every time I tried to stop having sexual sin, too big, too much, and just never worked. I could never stop because I needed Yehovah to do it. And over the course of time, with me simply focusing on him and his ways and doing things according to what he asked, and listening to his voice, and surrendering everything to him and being obsessed with him, all the sin completely fell off, gone. Don't struggle with it at all. Not at all. Like, I don't struggle with bulimia. I don't struggle with anorexia. I don't struggle with anxiety. I don't struggle with stress. I don't struggle with fear. I don't struggle with sexual sin. I don't struggle with all the things that I used to struggle with. Gone. That's because he got rid of it. And so that's what I'm saying. My point with that, but going off for that, was just to check yourself if you partake in this tradition of Rebekah Hummus during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You know, it feels like that is, for a lot of people, that's all it's about, is going through the house and trying to find the breadcrumbs and then getting rid of it yourself, when we totally miss the point. The point is that he will remove our sins if we eat of Yeshua. Okay, so we eat unleavened bread. Eat. And the more you eat of him, the less the sin is going to be. It's going to go. It's going to go away. So in the command about how to celebrate and keep or rehearse unleavened bread, yes, it says in the commands that if you are found eating leaven during this feast, then you will be, removed from Israel. You'll be cut off from Israel. So very serious to be eating of leaven, absolutely. But the thing I'm saying is that if you eat of Yeshua, then the leaven is going to disappear, because you can't have oil and water in the same place, right? You're going to have it's going to separate, right? His presence divides. It's going to divide out the wicked from the righteous. It's going to divide family members, or who's choosing someone else and who's choosing him. It's going to, in your own heart, it's going to like get rid of the leaven because you're eating of him. And that's where the focus, I think, is on this feast. Even though he's super serious about don't eat leaven, don't have sin in your life, or you're going to be cut off, And okay, so let's keep going here. So there is one thing that we do during Unleavened Bread that actually is kind of enlightening. In order to stay away from leaven throughout the course of this week and really get at the heart of what he's talking about, and it's not just the yeast in the fridge that you use to make bread, but it's symbolic. And so what is it symbolic of? Well, one tradition that we do to get at the heart of this is to make a list of all the yeasty people in our life, the yeasty places, and we won't go there, we won't commune with those people during this feast, because this feast, you're not supposed to be taking in leaven, right? And so you have leavened people around you all the time. You have leavened places, leavened things that you need to stay away from during this feast. It's interesting that Shaul actually teaches on how you're supposed to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Yes, Shaul or Paul in the New Testament or in the Bread of Affliction, he actually teaches us how to celebrate this feast. And by the way, this is after Yeshua has risen and ascended to heaven. These are the first disciples, in the first church, in the early world of the believers in Yeshua that were Jewish. They were still keeping the feast. You see Shaul teaching on the feast. So here we go. So let me show you. 1 Corinthians 5, 1-13. 1 Peter 1, 14-16. But in 1 Corinthians 5, 1-13, I'm going to summarize. And here's my summary. It says, "Don't you know that a little yeast works through the whole batch of dough? Therefore, keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread with sincerity and truth. You must not associate with anyone who calls himself a brother, but is an idolater. What business is it of mine to judge those outside of the assembly? Judge those inside. Yehovah will judge those outside. Expel the wicked man from among you." All right, so I think he was speaking to a specific congregation at the time, who had a man who was in this congregation who was having relations that he shouldn't have, and I think he's speaking directly to that congregation. But here you see that assembly. But here you see him say, "You must not associate with anyone who calls himself a brother, but who is an idolater." So an idolater would be full of leaven, right? So we need to stay away from that. We need to actually more than just stay away from it. During the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we should be purging our assemblies of wicked people, of people who are full of leaven, or who are participating in things that are causing leaven, right? So he's telling us to purge the assembly. How many fellowships do you know who take the opportunity during Unleavened Bread to purge the assembly of leavened people within it? That's not very Christian, right? Christians are all about loving and embracing and just stay as you are. We love you anyway. Not what the scripture says. Scripture says that during this feast, you're supposed to actually purge the wicked from among you, the idolaters and people that are leavened. So we make a list, and we write down places and people that are leavened that we don't want to go see, because we don't actually have a full-on assembly where we can practice this. We did one year, and we actually practiced this one year, and I have to be honest, it was super hard. We did it with a ton of love, but it was super hard. So this is not an easy thing to do by any means, but we need to. Yeshua did it. Remember, he cleanses his house, his fellowship of leaven, which was Judas, and Judas left. if there are people that are, or places or things that you're doing that are poisoning your walk with Yehovah, poisoning your walk with Yeshua, poisoning how you're eating of Yeshua, then you need to get rid of them in your life. Like, we practice it for these 7 days, our family staying away from certain people, but perhaps, we should be staying away from them all year long, I mean, this isn't just eating of Yeshua for 1 week. This is a practice for doing it all the time, okay? Okay, so we've spent a little bit of time looking at leaven, or at least wrapping our minds around what leaven is. Now let's look at matzah. Let's look at unleavened bread. What does it mean to be unleavened? What is matzah? Matzah, as I've said before, is unleavened bread. It's bread that's made without yeast. So it's kind of, it's flat. It's like flat bread. Only even some of our flat bread in the stores have yeast in them. But unleavened bread means there's no leavening in that bread. Just like you look at the unleavened one. Who is the unleavened one? Of course, it is Yeshua HaMashiach. He is without sin. He has no leaven in him. Let's look at scripture here. Hebrews 4:15 says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin," or unleavened. So there is only one person on this entire planet that has ever lived their entire life without any sin in them, and that is Yeshua. He is the unleavened one. All right, I'm just going to read to you from my book here. It says, Yeshua came to fulfill all the feasts. Therefore, the matzah that we are commanded to eat during this feast represents Yeshua, the unleavened bread, or the matzah, of whom we must eat. Yeshua calls himself the bread of life that we must eat of to have eternal life. And this is a crazy important feast. And then let's see what Yeshua says in John 6:35. He says, "Truth I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father, and he now gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of Yehovah is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." Yeshua said, "I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. He that comes to me shall never be hungry, and he that believes in me shall never thirst." So we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but basically matzah represents Yeshua, the unleavened one. So I hope that I have helped to make my point that we can understand what this feast is about by looking at how Yeshua fulfilled it, as he is the unleavened one and he is the bread of life. All right, so I see in this feast that this feast is about eating of something and getting freedom from something. So we're going to eat something that's going to bring us freedom. All right, so you have eating. You're supposed to eat the matzah, which in fulfillment would be eating of Yeshua, because Yeshua is the bread that Yehovah prepared for us to eat. So we're going to eat of Yeshua. Then we're going to get freedom from bondage, or freedom from, the Hebrew slaves got freedom from slavery, and we on this side, how Yeshua fulfilled it, we're going to get freedom from sin. All right, and then we're actually getting freedom towards something. So the Hebrew slaves were getting freedom to go towards the promised land, and we on this side of Yeshua get freedom towards the happily ever after. Okay, so the way Yeshua fulfills this feast is pretty amazing. Okay, so I think this is super cool here. This feast is about eating and getting freedom from bondage and getting the freedom or ability to go towards something. So here in the Hebrews' journey out of escape out of Egypt, you see that they ate matzah and they got freedom from slavery, and they got the opportunity and freedom to walk towards the promised land. So for us, we get to eat of Yeshua, who then gives us freedom from sin. And with that, then we can begin to walk towards the happily ever after. Cool, how they parallel. So the events that happened to the Hebrew slaves as they were journeying out of Egypt during Unleavened Bread is really a shadow picture of good things to come. And what did come was Yeshua. And so you see the shadow pictures here that actually give us a path to what John Eldredge calls an utter relief of holiness. So Yeshua's work that fulfilled the Feast of Unleavened Bread really brings us to the ability to have an utter relief of holiness. So we see that Yeshua fulfills the Feast of Unleavened Bread and brings in something that is going to give us an utter relief. Okay, and it's holiness. Holiness is going to relieve us. Holiness is actually going to set us free. But how do we become holy? You know, holiness means, I don't know if you've know John Eldredge, but I love, when we started coming out of Christianity, we were listening to a lot of his stuff, and he has a teaching on the utter relief of holiness. And you must go and check out his teaching on that, because if you can look at it through the Hebraic perspective, if you're Hebrew, it is truly amazing. Yeshua he came into situations and he knew what to do. He knew how to approach someone. He knew how to get out of a situation. He knew what to say in different situations. He didn't operate with fear. He didn't flee certain situations. He stood up for things. He stood up for his Father's Torah. He guarded the covenant. There's so many things about him, and you watch him as he walked through his life. That's the parts that's recorded, and he's calm. Unless he needs to have righteous indignation, which he does, but then he's angry at the Pharisees, and he's sad, and you see all these emotions, but you see this peace, this utter shalom, and he knows the job he has to do. He's focused. He's not divided inside. He's not tormented with, his job that's going to send him to the stake at the end of the year. He knows what he's doing, and he knows how to maneuver through situations. Wouldn't you like to know how to do that? Yeah. Wouldn't you like to kind of go through situations as life throws you things and be able to just, swing your racket and just hit that ball? He does it beautifully. He does it beautifully. And the whole point here of Unleavened Bread is that if you eat of Yeshua HaMoshiach, if you drink of him, then you get his life into you. And then you can do what he did. You'll have that ability. You'll have holiness in you. You'll have the utter relief of not stressing and striving for doing things on your own. You will have him in you doing things his way. You'll go through life and encounter all the situations you're going to encounter. And the more and more you eat of him, the more that he fills you and that he's in you, the more your reaction and how you deal with that situation is going to be like he would. That's utter relief, isn't it? So the idea is that you become what you eat. That's what this whole feast is about. To tell you, if you eat leaven, you're going to become leavened. If you eat sin, you're going to become sinful. If you eat unleavened bread, you're going to be unleavened. If you eat of the unleavened one, the perfect one, then you will become perfect according to what is required. So you know how there's a saying that goes garbage in, garbage out. So sin in, sin out, life in, life out, perfection in, perfection out. That's the idea. And that's the idea with this whole entire feast. It's all about what you eat. Now, let me just clarify how you eat. Okay, so this is Baruch atah Yahovah Heinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Blessed are you, Yahovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, who brought forth the bread from the earth. Thank you, Yeshua, for being the bread from the earth. So we eat unleavened bread. We eat, you eat your hummus. Oh, that's good. Yummy. You eat your tzatziki sauce. All right, I drink my water. Very nice. Now, where did that stuff go? You're right, it went into me, right? So now all these things that I just ate are going to get broken down and become part of me. It's going to feed my body. Those little machines that Yehovah made inside of me, it's going to feed all those machines so they work really well, right? So that things move well and do well in there. Okay, so I intaked through my mouth. That's one way to eat, but that's only one way. There are so many other ways to eat. You're watching me right now. You're eating me right now in my words with your eyes and with your ears. All right? You can't smell anything here, but you can see and you can hear me. I can smell that. It smells so good. It smells like mint and cilantro and parsley and a whole bunch of herbs like cumin. I think there's coriander and cardamom in there. Oh, salt, pepper, and garlic. That I'm smelling. That's another way to eat. So you eat with your ears, you eat with your eyes, you eat with your smell, you eat with your mouth, you eat with your touch. Look, I'm going to touch this. Oh, that feels so nice. I'm feeling, I'm touching, I'm eating. I'm a sponge. You're a sponge. Human beings are made like sponges. We absorb everything around us, right? That's why you see really, really, really super evil people. How they get so evil is all they're doing is consuming evil stuff. And pretty soon they are evil. So just like it says in the scriptures, when Judas and Yeshua supped at the same time, it says that Hasatan entered him. And then he's possessed by Hasatan, right? And gonna do Hasatan's will. If you eat of evil, you are going to produce evil fruit. You are going to become evil because you eat of it and it lives inside of you and it's going to affect everything. But if you eat of Yeshua, the unleavened one, then you're going to become perfect inside. You won't have the leaven. You'll be full of him. You're going to be eating with your eyes and your ears and your mouth and everything. You're going to be eating of him and partaking and consuming of him. We're consumers. Let's consume him and not sin, okay? And sin comes with the evil one because he's full of sin and he started it. So we're going to eat of the unleavened one during the Feast of Unleavened Bread and really get clear or have a word picture for us as to what this feast is about and what Papa really, really wants us to focus on. Where 10 times in there he said, eat unleavened bread, which means in the fulfillment of unleavened bread, Yeshua is the unleavened one, so we must eat of Yeshua. I think I've said that enough right now, haven't I? I feel like I'm going over and over and over repeating myself, but I don't think you could really say enough about this, except that I want you to stop this video at the end and I want you to go eat of Yeshua, okay? Enough eating of me. Stop binging me and go eat of Yeshua. Go binge Yeshua, okay? Don't binge me, go binge Yeshua, all right? And after you're full of him and you have the Ruach HaKodesh living in you, then go and tell others about him like I'm doing. And let them eat from you, so that then you can push them over to Yeshua HaMashiach. A bad teacher is going to say, just pay attention to me. A bad teacher is going to say, come to me and stay right here and learn from me. No, I want you to come here to my table. Yes, I want you to come here and learn from me. Yes, I do, because I do feel like I have something to tell you. But my whole goal is to get you over to Yeshua. I don't want you to stay here and to eat of me forever. This is not your end all right here. This is just a stop on your journey. And I'm going to say the most important one to eat of is Yeshua. Go eat of Yeshua. Now, tricky, because there's a lot of teachers out there who don't know Yeshua, who want you to eat of Jesus, or who feed you wrong and say it's him. So that's one of the reasons I'm here, is I really want to feed you the correct understanding of Yeshua and Yehovah, so that you can go eat properly. So you can actually be a little discerning when you go to eat of him. You know, this right here is an NIV version. There's some issues with translation in here. So, you know, I know this now. I'm not stirred by it anymore. I'm very clear on what is wrong in here and what is right, because of all the study that I've done and how much I have been taught by the Ruach HaKodesh. And I want to warn you and I want to show you, but in the end, you got to eat. And you got to eat of him, not me. Okay, so I hope that's clear. So thank you for coming here and letting me feed you and let me teach you. I'm so glad that you're here, but just know that my heart is for you to learn what you can from me and then go on and eat of Yeshua and really get him into you. All right, he is the perfect one. I am on my journey to being perfected, but just like you, we need to eat. So I'm constantly eating, as I hope you are, to gain that utter relief of holiness. I have to say, I think I have discovered the utter relief of holiness. I feel like I walk in that more than not. I feel like I navigate situations like my brother Yeshua does. And that's a growing in holiness. I think that's a better way to say it, actually, is, you know, the utter relief of a growing holiness, set apartness, kodeshness, and it's all based on, you know, what is holiness, what is goodness, what is perfection. Papa tells us what that looks like in his law. And we see it as our example in the life of Yeshua. So we need to look at Yeshua, look at the law, the royal law of love, and look at Yeshua. And you know, I can also wager that you could look at the heart of Yehovah through the course of history and just go, wow, that's what it looks like to be perfect. How he comes for you, how he loves you, how he lays his life down for you. How he makes a way, how he gets, you know, the stones out of the way so you can walk easily, so that you can understand him. So he wants to communicate with you. I mean, there's all kinds of wonderful things about both Yehovah and Yeshua and the Ruach HaKodesh that should help us know their hearts and what perfection looks like and what holiness looks like, because they are holy, right? Okay, so Hebrews 5:8-9 says, although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by Yehovah to be a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Okay, so isn't that interesting? He learned obedience from what he suffered and once made perfect, which is something that I wanted to point out a little bit later, but the idea that this matzah is also called the bread of affliction. So you have them running out of Egypt. They don't have time for their bread to rise. And so it's not as comforting of a bread to eat as a risen loaf is, but It's called the Bread of Affliction. And it's interesting, if you look at Yeshua and his sufferings, if you look at that as not only did he suffer with persecution later and all his sufferings at the end of his 70-week ministry, but if you look at the beginning of his ministry and you see how he went through the mikvah of suffering in the wilderness, whoa, you know, he went through that mikvah of suffering, and he proved that he was the son of Yehovah. He proved that he was going to obey at all cost. He proved that he would guard the covenant at all cost and Yah's law at all costs. And he resisted Hasatan. And at the end of that, then he comes out of the wilderness, and John the Baptist, or Yohanan ben Zachariah, looks at him and says, "There is the Lamb of Yehovah." It was after his suffering, after he went through the affliction and time of affliction there, where he became perfect. As in, he was made perfect after his suffering. As in, there's the perfect 1-year-old lamb right there. Like, that 1-year-old lamb didn't get perfect as the year went by. That 1-year-old lamb was perfect at that moment, ready to be sacrificed. You know, he had work to do before. He had lots to do, but he was perfect at that moment because he went through the tests. All right? He went through the suffering. If you look at the children of Israel as they're coming out of Egypt, and they have this matzah that's called the Bread of Affliction, and they go through, you know, the sea, and they become mikvahd right there, and then they come out on the other side. You know, there's this beautiful correlation there, I think, that you could explore and see that on the other side of that, they begin grumbling almost right away. I think if you look at that moment where they are in their time of suffering, they've already been suffering for hundreds of years as slaves, but right there they're suffering because they see Egypt coming after them. They see Pharaoh's army coming after them. And what do? They turn to Moses and say, "Did you bring us out here to die?" You know, so they didn't keep the faith. They didn't remember the plagues. They didn't remember the pillar of fire. They didn't remember all this stuff that Yahweh had just done to get them out of Egypt right at that moment. In my opinion, at this point, I look at that and I go, they failed right there. They failed right there when they questioned and said, "Did you bring us out here to die?" So Yeshua went through his wilderness time and came out of it perfected. But the children of Israel, they come out and they begin to grumble almost right away and question the heart of Yehovah. They believe that he's abandoned them. Okay, that's one of the things in the wilderness that Yeshua didn't buy. You know, Hasatan wanted Yeshua to buy the idea that Yehovah had abandoned him, and Yeshua was like, "No," you know, and he's quoting scripture back. The children of Israel come to that sea, the Gulf of Aqaba there, and they question, they believe he's abandoned them. And it continues on the other side of the sea. After the sea closes on their enemies, you know, then they believe some more, you know, that he had abandoned them. You know, "Did you bring us out here to like die of thirst and die of hunger?" And I mean, just on and on. They couldn't remember. But Yeshua did remember. And you would think that they would learn obedience through what they had suffered, but they didn't. So the good news is that we have Yeshua, who now we can eat of to have his abilities in us, which obviously our forefathers didn't have. Okay, they didn't have it, they still don't have it. So we want to eat of the one that has the abilities to be perfected, okay? Because we actually have to be perfect in his eyes. It says so. It says, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." What do you do with that? Well, we see right here in the Feast of Unleavened Bread how to become perfect, how to become set apart, how to become holy, how to have the utter relief of holiness is to get in him in us. Okay? Eat. Eat. All right, I think I've said that enough. Let's keep going. So I just have to say one more thing here about this, because I think that Christians are in la land if they think that Jesus kept the law for them. well, okay, maybe there Jesus did, because that's a different Messiah than the Hebrew Yeshua. But our Messiah did not keep the law for us so that we don't have to keep it anymore. He made a way for us to actually keep it. And this feast is what that way is all about. You can't keep the law without eating of the unleavened one. You cannot do it on your own power. It's just not possible. So in my opinion, stop worrying about whether, you're keeping every dot and tittle in the law right now. Look at Yeshua and eat of him, and that is going to happen naturally. Okay, you have to keep the law, but you've got to keep it with the right spirit. And the only way you're going to get that right spirit is to eat of Yeshua and have his Ruach HaKodesh in you. Turn that food into perfection. Okay? Yeshua made the way by which we are saved. How we are saved is to eat of him. He said it over and over and over. I think it's in John 6. You must eat of me. If you don't eat of me, you ain't going to have life. If you don't drink of my blood, you ain't going to get into the happily ever after, basically. So you must eat of him. All right? That is the main point of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because he literally became the bread and the wine that we need to eat. Okay? And like my teaching on the Lord's Supper, it's interesting, he was becoming the bread and the wine. At the moment he's actually, breaking the bread and passing the wine, and they're all drinking it. That moment he's becoming it. I mean, how amazing. I mean, how it works is seen in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It works because you know that whatever you intake, you become. Okay, that's how it works. Literally, there's no magic here. It's just whatever you focus on, whatever you spend most of your time watching, listening to, doing, feeding yourself, you're going to become like that thing. Okay, this is, like I said, this isn't magic. This makes tons of sense. So if you want to get to the happily ever after, you must eat of unleavened bread, the unleavened one. Okay? So I have a little example about eating that I think might help. When I was in my 20s, I went to college, and to Walla College, and there was a friend there who, her name was Holly. She became my best friend. And over the course of that first semester, her and I were together all the time. We roomed, well, we didn't actually room together, but it felt like we did because we were together all the time. We went to the cafeteria together. We went on walks together. We went to classes together. We hung out together. We made friends together. We would go, literally, her and I were super sanguine. We're still super sanguine. And her and I would go into the cafeteria before the crowd came in, and we would eat our meal. And then when the crowd came in, we would get little glasses of water, and we'd go flit around from table to table and say hi to everyone. I mean, it was this, man, we were so close, and it was like she was my best friend, and how she acted began to fill me. And when I went home for winter break, yes, Christmas break back then, when I went home for winter break, I will never forget my mom saying to me, who are you? I don't recognize you. Like, my mannerisms were different, how I talked was different, how I interacted with her was different. It was good, because before it wasn't so good. And then after I had all this exposure to Holly, I came home and it was pleasing to my mom. She loved it. She liked that. And I loved it. I liked who I was when I was with Holly, and literally Holly and how she saw life and everything has very much impacted me. I still have a lot of things that are now mine that started in her, and that she, with all the time we spent together, she fed me. I was eating of her, and I got a lot of her in me, and the good parts that I just love in me. And now I'm blessed. I'm a different person than I was before meeting Holly. So here's that same way, when you eat of someone, how it can change you. All right? this is good. So now we need to eat of the one that's going to get us to the happily ever after. Holly isn't going to get me to the happily ever after. I'm appreciative of all the things that she taught me and the things that I ate of her that now are mine, that make me into the person I am today. But I need to eat of Yeshua now so I can get to the happily ever after and have all the wonderful things that are waiting for me there. And that we talk about, the hope that lies there, we talk about on First Fruits. So go watch my First Fruits teaching to find out what it is that we're hoping to get by eating of Yeshua. Okay, just one other quick thing here. When you eat of Yeshua, it's not always going to be, it's not always going to be wonderful. It tastes good, okay? This actually, is called the Bread of Affliction. So when you eat of Yeshua, the unleavened one, it isn't always going to be easy. In fact, I would have to say that most of it is not going to be easy. Like when you eat of Yeshua, you are going to, you're going to go through a lot. You're going to be tested. It's going to be hard. You're going to lose friends and family. You're going to have, things divided, not in you, but divided in your surroundings, because you will actually be light and there's darkness around you, and people are going to choose darkness over light. You'll be hated in your own home. He said it. Yeshua said it. He said what was going to happen to us. So eating of him is going to be good, because it's going to get you to the happily ever after, heaven, the next life, when things are restored, when paradise comes back and Genesis comes again. You want that. I'm telling you, that's what you want. You don't want just this life, okay? And in order to get the next life, you have to eat of Yeshua, but it will be painful, okay? You are going to have suffering that goes with that. Okay? All right. All right, so there is, like we talked about a little before, there's a command that stumps Christians. And I don't know if it really stumps them or they just completely ignore it. But the scripture says that we must be perfect. Okay, so in their mind, in Christianity's mind, somebody who's a Christian, in their mind, being perfect means, I think, floating above the earth in some monk form, where you're just like not affected by anything, and you never raise your voice, and you never yell at your children, and you always say the right thing, and you never have like a potty mouth and that sort of thing. That to be unaffected by life, that is a Buddhist thing. It's a New Age thing. That is not what Yehovah is talking about, because clearly we can see that the unleavened one, the perfect one, the Lamb of Yehovah, Yeshua HaMashiach, he was affected by his surroundings. He cries, he gets down on the ground and weeps with people. He rejoices, he is angry, he's disgusted. He has all these different emotions. And so when the scripture says you must be perfect, I really think that Christians just write that off and say, that's not what it means. Well, let's read it actually. It says in Matthew 5:47, Yeshua HaMashiach, our rabbi, says, "Therefore be ye perfect as your heavenly Father in heaven is perfect." All right, and then in Leviticus 19:2, you actually see Yehovah say it. "Speak to the congregation of the sons of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy," or Kodesh, set apart, "for I, Yehovah your Elohim, am holy." Okay, so holy meaning perfect. So Yehovah is saying, be ye perfect like I am perfect. And Yeshua is saying, be perfect like the Father in heaven is perfect. And I think most people go like, I am not perfect. I think people like to say that. And I think they like to say that because it kind of justifies their non-perfection, okay? Because people just don't want to be uncomfortable. So you don't want to live with this guilt hanging over your head that I'm not what I'm supposed to be. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And that is really not going to get you very far in this walk. So if you have that thought, you need to get rid of it, take your thoughts captive and toss that out and say, teach me, and be open to being taught what this actually means. And I believe that the Feast of Unleavened Bread really teaches us what this means. One thing that I find really stunning is to discover what Yeshua was actually teaching on and praying about right before Pesach. So as he's going to be betrayed, he actually has a conversation. He's teaching his disciples on the way to the Kidron Valley, around the table, and then on the way to the Kidron Valley. And then he's also in his prayer. You see what's important to him. And look at this. It's amazing. I have this talk. I teach more on this. If you want to watch the talk that I have, or the basics teaching on the Lord's Supper, or the Last Supper, he talks about Yehovah being in him and him being in Yehovah. And then he turns it to talk about him being in his disciples and his disciples being in him. And thus, if his disciples are in him, then they are also in him and he is in them. He's got this beautiful idea of this consuming thing going on, and where one is in the other and the other is in the other, So you look at that and you go, that is a consuming, that is an eating of, that is having him in us. Okay, so if he says we must be perfect like our Father in heaven is perfect, if he says, I want you to be in them like you are in me and I am in you, how do the disciples get him into them? Well, it's through Yeshua, because Yeshua said, I and my Father are one, so eat of me and then you will have the Father in you. You will be perfect like my Father in heaven is perfect, because I am perfect, because I am in him and he is in me. So it's so interesting. He was talking about this. So look at John 17:22. In fact, this whole thing is so good, but John 17:22 says, I have given them the glory that you gave me, so that they may be one, even as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may be made perfect in one, and that the world may know that you have sent me and that I have loved them and have loved them as you have loved me. Look at this. Isn't that amazing? I in them and you in me, that they may be perfect in one. So, is that cool? So the answer to the question, how am I made perfect? How do I become perfect? Is found in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay? So have you ever wondered what the mystery of the gospel is that's talked about in the Brit Hadashah? So let's look. So it says in Colossians 1:26-27, even the mystery having been hidden from the ages and from the generations, but now is revealed to his saints, to whom Yehovah willed to make known what are the riches of the glory of this mystery among the nations, which is Messiah in you, the hope of glory. Him we preach, warning every man and teaching every man in all wisdom, that we may cause every man to become perfect in Messiah Yeshua. Wow, isn't that cool? So the mystery, that's also Romans 16:25-26. So the mystery of the gospel that we see here is Yeshua in us, making us perfect. You can't get, this is really awesome here. This is super cool. This is like the heart of the feast. This is the heart of unleavened bread, right? How do you get that, get that perfection? You get Yeshua in us, okay? And that is the mystery of the gospel. The gospel is getting him into us so that we are made perfect, so that we can get to the happily ever after, okay? So more than understanding the mysteries in Revelation knowing what's coming down, when it's coming down, how the end of the age is going to work, which a ton of people are like super focused on right now because of what's going on in the world. We can see that, things are escalating and things are, Aslan is on the move. So Yehovah is on the move. Messiah is on the move. So exciting. But it can be like, whoo, let's find out what Revelation is talking about. How do we know? But there's so much mystery there. There's some things you can totally know, but there's so much mystery there that I think everybody's like, just wants that. But more than trying to figure out the mystery of Revelation and figuring that out, you know what we should be focusing on? We should be focusing on and figuring out the mystery of the gospel, which is Messiah in you, revealed in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, revealed how to do that in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And as a Christian before, I was completely feast illiterate. I had no idea what this was talking about. How to get him in you, I don't know. But now that I'm feast literate and I'm a Hebrew and I'm obeying, I look at this feast and I go, wow, this feast is crucial. This feast is way more crucial than you knowing how to stock up properly for the end of the age events. It's way more crucial for you to know the mystery of the gospel and how to actually get him in you than for you to know, what the mysteries of the Revelation are talking about. Okay? We got it all wrong. We got it all backwards. And I'm here to try to help you and encourage you to do the right thing. Okay? Eat of Yeshua more than anything. When we look at the end of the age and everything coming down, Yeshua said, he said, these things will happen to you, but I tell you so that you can have peace. Don't be troubled. I have overcome the world. And so if you see, that's what he said. He said, yeah, look at these things. These things are going to happen, yes. But don't be worried. Don't be troubled, because guess what? I have overcome the world. So if our Messiah, the bread of life, the unleavened one, has overcome the world, then what do you think happens when you eat of him? If you eat of him, then you yourself are going to overcome the world. All right, so so as we are winding down this teaching, I have another very crucial point to bring out in regards to unleavened bread, and that is that we actually help to fulfill this feast. This feast is actually something that can't completely be fulfilled without us participating. All right, so two very important scriptures here that I want to point out. One is Matthew 5:17, and it says, I have come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. All right, the word there for the word fulfill is actually the word plero. I don't know quite how you say it, but it's Strong's 4137, and it means to make full, to make complete, to fulfill, or I fulfill. All right, now I got another verse for you. It is James 2:8, and this says, if you, talking to a person, if you fulfill the royal law according to the scriptures, ... The word here for that fulfill is teleo, and it's number 5055 in the Strong's, and it means to fulfill, complete, or bring to an end. All right, so I want you to know, as you can see, that we are actually expected to fulfill the royal law, not just Yeshua, okay? Yeshua fulfilled it perfectly. All right, he is the perfect one. He is the unleavened one. How do we fulfill it the way that would please Yehovah? We eat of Yeshua. We get the gift of the Ruach HaKodesh living in us to make to make the bread of Yeshua in us do what it's supposed to do, and then we in turn will become perfect like Yeshua and fulfill the law like he did. Oh my. I mean, we're not the lamb, of course not. We're not going to actually, to the day and to the hour, do it like he did, but we're going to fulfill it, as in keep it, as in do it perfectly. All right? In all our stumbling and all our trying to do it properly, we're going to have him in us, and it's going to be good. It's going to be okay. Yeah, so we actually play a role in this feast, because you know how you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink? Well, Yehovah can, make the food for you. He can lead you to that food. He can take it and he can put it in front of you. He can hand it to you. He can take your hand out and put it in your hand. But he cannot put it in your own mouth and chew it for you. You have to actually eat. That's a free will. You have complete free will over the idea and the fact of whether you eat or not. Okay? Total free will. So unleavened bread, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, is actually the application of Pesach. All right? Because without the blood that we put on the doorways of our hearts, then we wouldn't be alive to live and eat of him. So unleavened bread is the application of Pesach. Okay, so the blood of the lamb spread on the doorway of our hearts allows us to live another day, so that we can then partake in the unleavened one and eat of him, and thus become perfected and have that utter relief of holiness in us to operate and do and be like Yeshua, so that we can then, get to the happily ever after. So we can fulfill the royal law of love, which we're required to do in order to get the right paperwork, the legal paperwork, so that we can get to the happily ever after. See how it's so amazing how these feasts just intertwine and work together. Super beautiful. So again, in just a little bit of different words, I believe that unleavened bread is the path to holiness. And the more holy you are, the more set apart you are, the more kodesh you are, the more relief you're going to have, because you're going to be operating like Yeshua. All right, so I just want to read a couple verses to you. This one is 2 Corinthians 3:18. It says, "And we all who with unveiled faces contemplate Yehovah's glory are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory." Okay, so by contemplating him, we are being transformed. And we're actually, the more we contemplate, the more we are growing in increasing glory. All right, and then let's look at Romans 12:2. It says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Oh! Then you will be able to test and approve what Yehovah's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. That's really good. That's really cool. So be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve. Then you'll be able to know what his will is. That's awesome. So I think this goes off of what I had thought of, what I was mentioning before, is focus on eating, contemplating, getting into Yeshua, and then you'll be able to know what it is you're supposed to be doing, what law you keep, what's going to please him. That's awesome. That's a really great text. And then also remember in the scriptures it talks about, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are pure, think on these things. There's that verse in there. I'll try to put it up right here because I don't have it handy. But that tells us also what the kind of input we are supposed to be having. For those of you who keep Shabbat and open Shabbat every Friday evening at sunset with a special meal and maybe candles and a special bread like challah, he says that every single time you break bread, you are to think of him, right? And that evening, when you do that little service with breaking the bread and drinking the wine, that is like communion, okay? You know, when you're in Christianity and you have communion service and you get a tiny, I remember this. I remember getting a little tiny piece of cracker like that and a little tiny shot of juice. And we would only do communion in the church I was at every 13 weeks. How they came up with 13 weeks, I'll never know. Whatever. You know, when we eat, break the bread on Friday evening, we eat bread. We break bread. You can't break this little piece and pass it around the whole congregation, can you? We break bread and we pass it around the table. We drink his blood, symbolized in the juice that we pour and bless. We get to participate in communion, the original communion, every single week, because this is how we open Shabbat. So if I were you, I would stop doing communion, the pathetic, meaning nothing communion at church, because they don't talk about Yeshua. They don't sit there and go, let's take communion, let's take part in the bread of life and let's eat of Yeshua right now. They don't do that. If they did, maybe there'd be something to it, but it's meaningless unless you actually eat of Yeshua. I mean, the bread itself is meaningless. It's just a symbol, all right? So partake in that communion service, the original communion service that Yeshua actually did up in his in the upper room there the night before he went to the stake, and you'll be so blessed, so blessed. So blessed. It's because this bread is more important than food, is more important than water, is more important than air. So do you remember when Yeshua was with the Samaritan girl at the well and the disciples had gone off to get something to eat and they come back and he said, I'm full now, I'm not hungry anymore. And they're like, what? Did somebody give you something to eat? And he's like, no, I actually have bread that you know nothing about. And he quotes during his wilderness time during the temptations, he's like, you know, man shall not live by bread, just the bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yehovah. And Yeshua came to speak the words of Yehovah to us, right? So this is symbolic of eating of Yeshua, who spoke the words of Yehovah, right? Oh, I could just go on for hours. We need to close this. All right. So I just want you to think that unleavened bread this week, the 7-day period of eating of unleavened bread, is really like a rebooting. Okay. So if you feel like you've fallen off the bandwagon and you haven't been eating of him, this is a time that Papa wants to talk about this, and he wants to say, hey, I'm reminding you, guess what? You need to eat of the unleavened one. And if you don't, you ain't going anywhere. Good. So this is a good time to get a reboot. It's not a time for, to whip yourself and feel all horrible and just get all mad at yourself. Just start from today and go forward and change, begin to eat and consume. Remember, eating is your free will. No one can force you to eat. All right, that is something that you do. And so he will remove the sin from you, but you have to eat of something that's not sinful so that he can do that. And the only thing that we have to eat of that's not full of sin and leaven is Yeshua. Have I said that enough? I feel like, when I'm reading Yeshua and I'm reading what he talks about, he repeats himself over and over and over. Eat of me, eat of me, eat of me, drink of me, drink of me, and it's like, and the disciples are like, huh? And I feel that's how people are, it's like, I'm so tired of life the way it is. I feel like a slave to my feelings. I feel like a slave to my emotions. I feel like a slave to food. I feel, and it's like, I'm not perfect. I'm not doing everything right. Please teach me how, Rebekah. And I want to scream is what I want to do, because this is the only way. I can teach you till I'm blue in the face, just like Yeshua could teach his disciples till he's blue in the face. But unless his disciples actually took it literally and ate and consumed it, what could Yeshua do? That's how I feel. It's like I can teach it, but unless you consume it, unless you really put it into your heart, what can I do? You know? So if you eat lots of matzah, which someday I want to have a little restaurant called Lots of Matzah, Lots of Matzah Bakery and Cafe, someday, once I get the money to do that, someday Hadassah and I are going to do that. But if you eat lots of matzah, then the sin is going to decrease and the perfection is going to increase. I'm going to say that one more time. If you eat lots of matzah, as in lots of the unleavened one, Yeshua, then the sin is going to automatically decrease and the perfection is going to increase. Okay, you're going to grow in holiness. But it ain't going to happen unless you eat. And, you know, you have to eat every single day, right? That's the whole point. You have to eat every day. You have to do this every day. If you don't eat of him every day, just start today. Don't worry about yesterday. Just start right now and go forward. Okay? All right, so as we close here, let me just end on a DIY sort of talk. How practically do you get him into you? Okay, well, one way we do during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or one way that I want to do, and sometimes I struggle with my family, you know, don't think we got it all together, because we don't, but one thing that I want to do and I like to do with my family, it gives me great pleasure, is when we eat of the bread, and we have bread in the morning and bread at evening, most of the time, twice a day in different forms, and eating it with different things. So as we are sitting around the table eating of the matzah during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, I love to talk about Yeshua. So, you know, you could open the scriptures and look at a story in there and dissect it and go, you know, how did he act in this situation? What did he choose to do? What was the environment like? What was the context, and what was his actions? How did he resolve this problem? How did he, where was his focus? And, you know, just look at how he operated in all these different situations he found himself in. One thing that I have that you can actually purchase on my online store as a PDF, you just go to teshuvaministries.com, click on shop, and go to Rebekah Co. And on there, you will find some actual menus for helping you eat of Yeshua. These are actually menus that I made for children. So something that I knew was so important. He said, you must eat of me. And I'm like looking at my children going, how can I teach my children and the other children that come to my table, how can I teach them to eat of Yeshua? So sometimes we would have people over, families over for Erev Shabbat, and the children that were sitting there, as we're talking about how important it is to eat of Yeshua when we break the bread. So here's the, we bless the Yehovah for the bread that came from the earth, that he brought forth from the earth, and then we pass it around and we, this is his body, and let's eat of it. And then I'm looking at the kids going, they have no clue how to actually eat of Yeshua. So I came up with some menus for the people at my table to look at. So we actually can look at the menu and order something off the menu. So it's super cool. It has breakfast items and dinner items and desserts and breads and drinks, and each one is like something that he loved to do, or something that reveals a characteristic or a personality trait of Yeshua that I go, whoa, I want that. No fret apple fritters. Oh, I so want to stop fretting. Yeshua didn't fret and also let others fret without him while he went about his own business. So he said, you're fretting, see you later. I love that. So no apple fritters. And then I have an addendum that goes with these. It has all the scriptures that you can look up. That is one way to eat of Yeshua, and that's going to spark so much conversation, around your table. I'm just going to read a list of things here on how you can practically eat of Yeshua. So read about him, read his life in the scriptures. This chronological gospels is awesome because it will help you really understand the flow of his ministry, his 70-week ministry. Obey him. Shema. He's the prophet. We're supposed to Shema. Obey him. Obey his father because he said to. Obey the Father, Yehovah. So actually do what he said to do. Read what he read. He read the Torah. Study his priesthood, so he's the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Well, study that. What does that mean? What happened to the Levitical priesthood? All of a sudden there's now this Melchizedek priesthood. What does that mean? Go get the book that Isaac and I edited, this Dr. David Perry's book called Back to the Melchizedek Future, and you will find out, you'll be able to learn about this priesthood. Study the gift that he gave. So he gave this gift. Remember, he said he had to leave in order for the Ruach HaKodesh to come, the gift of the Comforter. Well, figure out what that means. Look at that. Who is this? And it's a she. It's a she. It's a feminine Ruach. Oh, super awesome. Invite the Ruach HaKodesh, his gift, into your heart. Memorize his words, literally memorize his words, something I need to do so much more of. And memorize his father's words like he did. Remember, he knew his father's words so well, he could recall them in the middle of starving, in the middle of the wilderness, in the middle of Hasatan on his butt, and he remembered the words of his father and could use them as the sword against the evil one. Oh my. Think about him, right? Sit with him. Just sit with him. I used to do this. I used to go down to the beach and just sit there and just contemplate and think and just invite him to come sit with me. Copy him. Exactly. Copy him. You're his Talmudim, you're his disciple, right? If that's what you want to be, then do exactly what he did. Copy him. You're going to celebrate Shabbat because he did. You're going to do this because he did. Blah, 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 blah. Yes. Something about the tzitzits. The tzitzits were good for a time, and that's a huge thing that we need to talk about. But tzitzits, after the death, he wouldn't have been wearing tzitzits anymore because he's no longer under the Levitical law. Okay, big thing there to talk about. So you wouldn't be wearing tzitzits anymore. He did because he had to prior to the change, but then after that, he didn't. So that's a big thing right there. And just study the priesthood and then you'll understand. Okay, converse with him, pray, talk to him, follow him at all costs. Okay, so follow him, obey him at all costs. Love him by loving others. Okay, so this is huge right here. If you are worried whether you yourself are, keeping the law exactly as you should, if you're worried about your own salvation, I'm going to give you a hint. I'm going to give you a clue. Okay, I'm going to give you a clue that'll help you be golden. All right. You go love other people. You go help other people. Name the person. You go help your friend Claire learn how to get to the happily ever after. You help her get onto that narrow path. And then you see another friend and you help that friend figure out how to get onto the narrow path. You help them. And pretty soon, it's going to be very clear that you are operating in the exact thing that he wants you to operate in, other-centered love. Okay, so you think about other people, you help other people, and you are going to find yourself in line with him. It's going to, all the other stuff, the baggage, everything's going to fall off. You are going to be doing what you need to be doing. You're going to be on that narrow path if you love others. Okay, and we have to know the definition of love. according to Yehovah, because it's not tolerance. It's not what we want love to be. Love means you lay your life down for your friends. Love means that you pour yourself out. Love means that you're other-centered, just like they are. Okay, they are other-centered. They are love, and love is other-centered. Okay, so there was never a time when Yehovah was alone, because it can't be. You have to have another in order to be other, right? And to have other-centered. So my suggestion for you is to worry about other people, think about other people, try to help other people, and you're going to be golden. Help them get to the happily ever after, not just help. Okay, you can go wash somebody's dishes, you can go, do things that are super temporary. And yes, there might be something that's totally done in your heart and stirred with that, because just anything you do for someone else is going to be a good thing in your own life. But if you help them get to the happily ever after, you're going to find yourself on that path, okay? Just a few other things you could do that are practical. Fish, like he fished for men. So fish for other people, which is like what I was just talking about. Love his father like he did. Get away, go away, get away out, away from people, and commune with your father. He separated himself out in the early morning hours to go get filled up from his father. We should be doing the same thing. Create music or create art about him. Write about what he has done for you. So journal, write stories, write books, film. If you're super creative, use your creative talents, use those creative geniuses to feast on him and make things for him using his words, using what you know about him and his father and the law and what you're supposed to do in the feast. This is my thing, is the feast, man. This is what I love to do, is delve into the feasts and create things for his feasts. That is, I just love doing that. It keeps me so focused and so centered and so looking directly at him that, and I pour myself out. I'm completely I'm just drained because I'm giving. So it is awesome. It's so beautiful because I'm eating of him. Blog or something, write his family in heaven story down. So, as you learn the story of their story, write it down. Love what he loves and hate what he hates. Reject what he rejects. Pray over someone. Pray over Israel. Pray for his own family, Judah. Study his personality. Tell his parables to others. Create dramas about the parables, right? To films, like The Chosen has been awesome. We really like that lately. Behold him. Act and do as he did. Learn Hebrew. Learn his language. Yeah. Visualize him. Call him by his right name. Yeshua, not Jesus. It's Yeshua. Call his father by the right name. Yehovah, YHVH. Study his character traits. Worship him with song and dance. Do some dancing, create dances for him that you're going to do at feast time or on Shabbat. Study his work, what he accomplished through his death, resurrection, and ascension. Study what all that means for you, for Israel. Read the words of those who loved him and those who had direct eyewitness accounts. Read their words, of course. Celebrate the feast because they're all about him. And then read books about him. One of my favorites is A Beautiful Outlaw by John Eldridge. And then go to Israel and walk where he walked. Go to the Garden Tomb area and see where all of that work happened. With the death and the in the grave and resurrection, where he was at Unleavened Bread. Oh my heavens. And then one of my favorites is just ask the question, you have a situation in your life, and then ask the question, what would Yeshua do in this situation? And then do what he would do. Okay, so that just concludes my long teaching on unleavened bread. I really hope that it has blessed you. I hope that you eat matzah all week long and that you figure out how to get Yeshua into you. All right? So if you need a reboot, use this feast to do that. It's super awesome. I love this feast. And so may you be blessed as you enter into the feast and learn to eat of Yeshua. His words are sweet like honey. His life is sweet like honey.